Hello everyone and welcome to another video with us here at Man and Machine. Today we're going to be looking at creating dynamic blocks inside of AutoCAD, and this is a bit of a continuation from a blog post that we've created as well, a bit of a collaboration between a blog post and a video just to give a nice full rounded experience. So if you haven't already looked at the blog itself, you will find a link for it down below. And we're essentially just going to be building up on some information from inside there. So if you are new to dynamic blocks, I would highly recommend reading the blog. We give a nice detailed description of what the different features are, especially for beginners. And this one, as I say, is going to be a bit of a continuation of that blog itself. So without any further ado, I'm just going to go straight into the software, and we're going to have a look at the ways we can use our existing blocks inside of AutoCAD and start to make them a little bit cleverer, a little bit smarter in the way they work, and hopefully speed up some of the processes that you'll be working through in your own environments, and potentially giving you a few tips and tricks along the way as well. So the blocks that we're going to have a look at today have been inspired by a few of our clients recently. They've had some queries on dynamic blocks themselves and ways we can make their workflow that much quicker with regards to adding a bit of detailing and a little bit of a nicer workflow to the way they place their blocks down. And rather than having a single, or rather than having multiple blocks, we can have a single block that can be used in multiple different configurations. So the blocks that I've already got today, we're going to be looking at this coordinate marker over here. We're also going to be looking at a north arrow and creating a block label like the one on screen at the moment. So all of these ones, I've already created the block for them, so I'm not going to go through the process of creating these blocks. They are all fairly simple ones, and we're just really going to be looking at how we're going to make these dynamic. So these are all blocks, as you can see over here. Fairly simple one. I've got two straight lines intersecting in the midpoint with a circle. So again, fairly simple in there. When we want to make this now into a slightly cleverer block, rather than just being a point marker that we just place down somewhere on screen, we want to be able to read out the coordinates that this particular marker has been set to. Now, I could go in and find the coordinates in the component itself. At the moment, this is on the origin, so I can see the X, Y, and Z positioning at 0. But we want to make this a little bit smarter. So we can go straight into the block editor, select the block that we want to edit, and we're going to go in and place an attribute that will appear inside of the block itself. And to do that, we can go over to our action parameters panel, grab the attribute definition, and then say that we want to create a attribute with the tag coords. We could also give it a prompt if we wanted to and say that we were looking for the coords or coordinates, or however you want to name that. Then where this gets cleverer is we've got the ability in here to go for a default value. And that default value, we can insert a field into that. So if you aren't familiar with fields inside of AutoCAD, they essentially look at either the drawing or the object that we're pointing to, or a few other features inside of AutoCAD itself, and will bring that property in as a value. So in this case, I want to go in and grab the objects filter, whether I'm selecting it from all fields or just specifically objects, doesn't really matter. Inside of that, there are two fields that we could essentially go in and grab for this one. We could either go and grab the block placeholder, which will ask us to which will basically go and find the block itself, and the insertion point of this block we can go and grab from this list. So from the position over here of this block, wherever the insertion point is, it's going to read out a value for us. And we can have that value set to either the current units, decimal, architectural, engineering, and so on. We can also specify which coordinate system we're looking for, in this case the X and the Y, or which axes we're looking for rather. In this case X and Y, we're not too worried about the Z. We could go and apply some additional formatting to this if we wanted to, but it's simply a case of going in the field category, selecting objects, looking for the block placeholder and then looking for this block placeholder's position and then choosing the format essentially from them. The other option we could go for as well, if it wasn't the insertion point we were looking for, but rather another location on the block itself, is I could actually go and select object instead. And then in the object type, go and select the object that I want to grab. And because it's going to be in the center of the object itself, in this case, the center of the circle, I could grab the circle, and I would also be able to go and grab its position from the list itself. So I've got the ability from inside of this list to go and find the center point of the circle. And again, I've got the ability to go in and choose either current units, decimal, architectural, engineering, and so on. And then choose whether I'm looking for the X, Y, or Z, or any combination of the three. So if, again, your insertion point isn't on the exact point that you're looking for, you could always create some geometry or place some geometry in that you would want to use for that. In this case, the block insertion point is exactly the point, the position that I'm needing. So I'm going to go and grab block placeholder, select position, current units, and I'm only looking for the X and Y coordinates. I'll hit OK on there now, and you'll see that it's now grabbing the insertion point of the block itself. I can choose how I want to set up the text for this. So for the justification, I'll go middle center, nice and neatly around the point at which I choose to place the text. And then for the text height, currently 2.5, based on the size of my object, I'm going to bump this up to 5. But this is always best just to establish based on the component that you're creating or the block you're creating yourself. You could also choose a text style from inside here as well. If you wanted a slightly different style, you could go in and create that by all means. I'll hit OK on there now. You can see now the text size, although it might be a bit too small, I can bump that up if I need to. I can now go in and specify its insertion point, which I'm going to make sure is in line with the center and a little further down below, maybe around 120 below that center point. I do think that that's probably a little bit too small, so I'm going to grab that text. And if we've got our properties palette active, we can go in and quite easily change the size of the text in there. So I've got my text height over here. I might bump that up to 10, and that looks a little bit better from there. Now we could go and test that if we wanted to, but really all it's doing is picking up a property and or at least a field. So I'm not even going to go and test the block. I'm just going to go and close the block editor, save the changes. Now it won't automatically grab that inside of this particular block that I've already got placed in. The reason being is that's an attribute, and if we wanted to grab attributes, we need to do a synchronization of attributes on specific blocks. That can easily be done by going into the block drop-down in the block panel. In the block drop-down, we've got synchronize attributes, or the command for that is @sync. But in this case, if I had to go and insert that coordinate point once more, you can see that I've got the insertion point as an attribute over there, and wherever I place that in, it's automatically going to be grabbing the coordinates of that particular point, no matter which drawing I'm working in. So really great functionality there, rather than having to go and read that out every single time, grab the block, find its insertion point over here. We've got the ability just to go and grab it from the attributes, and it's actually displaying in the attributes now as well. You might have noticed that we can at any point change that as well if we wanted to. So if for whatever reason you might want to change the value, show it as something else, you don't have to have the live coordinates in there. You could have whatever text you might want to below that, or add whatever text you might want to that field as well. And then because it is a block, it will then be collectible from inside of our layouts as well. So if I had to go into my layout and insert a view, let's go for something a little larger than this, if it will let me, go for something like that initially. Insert the view in there, you can see the coordinates are coming through in the drawing as well. So really great functionality in that, and hopefully that helps you as well. The other block that we can come in and edit is this north arrow over here. So in a lot of cases, you've got obviously the need to place a north arrow on your drawing, especially when you're working in sites and that, and you might have your own north arrow already configured. You might want to start one from scratch, and I've just quickly created this one with 2 concentric circles and a little triangle around the letter N. So nice and simple one here. You can have it as complex or as simple as you like as part of this process. But what we often get with these ones then is if we have to change the angle of that arrow, sure, we could use a rotation around the center point. If I go and grab that center point, but then obviously the letter flips around, so that only works in some angles really. If we want to have a 90 degree or 180 degree, it doesn't quite do what we need it to. So the way around that then is creating this again as a dynamic block, being able to make a change to the object that will allow us to have variations of the design itself. Again, that's the whole point of our dynamic blocks, is to be able to create variations of a single design. And this one's, again, a fairly simple one to do. If we go and edit the block from inside here, I'm going to go and grab the north arrow, hit OK on there. We can come in and make use of some of the parameters and actions inside of our dynamic block inputs. So with every action, we need a parameter. So the first thing we need to do is insert a parameter in here. And this one's fairly straightforward, because what we want to do is rotate the arrow around the center point of the north arrow symbol itself. So naturally, we'd go in and grab the rotation parameter. And the rotation parameter is going to specify how much of a rotation we want, as well as the center point of that particular rotation. So when it's asking us to specify the base point, it's also at this point asking us to specify the center point of the rotation that we will then be creating. So I'm going to go and grab the center of the object itself, hovering over here with my my object snapping rather. So hovering over the circle to grab my center point of the circle itself, nice and in the middle there. The next one it wants to know is the radius of the parameter. This will define the radius at which the grip appears at. So I'm going to grab the tip of the arrow as my grip point, place it there, and you can see it's going to be a radius of 7. And then the angle is the point along the circumference of the parameter itself that my grip is going to be located at. In this case, again, it's going to be right at the tip over there. So all I need to do is grab onto the tip, and it will then rotate the object around. So I'm going to go grab that one over there. And then the last one is just the positioning of this parameter. So I'm going to place a parameter then. It's called angle 1. If I select this, I can rename it if I wanted to. So I can change it to angle. Not much of a change in this case, but if you want to just for the sake of neatness, change that to something else, you've got the ability to change it in there. You can add a description if you wanted to, and so on, as well as changing the base location, the radius, the offset of the label, the base angle, and the angle itself. So nice and simple on that one. Center point, radius of the point itself, and then position of the point. We then want to link an action to this. So when we do adjust this parameter, we want something to change, and that's when we would go down to the actions panel. Just as a quick reminder, if you don't have this block authoring palette open, it's just this authoring palette over here in the manage panel. Otherwise, these exact same options are available inside the action parameters panel. In the drop down over here, I've got rotation, and the next one I'm going to have is rotate. Nice and simple. So again, the action that I want to go and grab is the rotate action, and it wants to be linked to a parameter. So when the parameter changes, it adjusts this object by X amount, by the amount driven by the parameter. So I'm going to go and grab that parameter, and then it wants me to select the objects that I want rotating as well. So in this case, I want the hatching that I've got filling that object. I also want all of the lines connected to that. Now I could stop there, but in this case I probably just want the outside to rotate around as well, just in case. We might have something on the back over there indicating the tail of the arrow or something, or any other lines around there giving us a greater understanding of the exact angles nearby, or any other references. But in this case, I'll just go for the outer circle and the shape itself. Once I'm happy with that selection, I can hit enter, and that's pretty much that done. We've added our parameter in, we've added our action in, And now we probably just want to test this to make sure it's behaving in the way we would expect. So we can go into the Open Save panel from here, into the Test Block window. And now if I activate the block, you should see a new grip appear inside of the block itself. And all I need to do now is rotate that around to a specified angle. This can be any angle I want. And now our letter is in exactly the right orientation, but everything else then rotates around it, which is great. So I'm happy with that. I'll close the test block editor. I'll go into the block once more. We can also, if we want to specify set angles that we want our arrow to be located at. So if there were set angles that you wanted to use for this, we could edit the actual parameter itself. And rather than the value set having no limitation on the angle, we could say that we want to have incremental angles between a certain range, so between 0 and 360 at the moment, but we could limit that range as well. And then we can choose on the increment that we want as well. Otherwise, we could also create a list of values instead. So if I go down to list over here, and in the angle value list, we've got the little pop-out menu over here where we can come in and add any number of different angles that we might want that value to be able to adhere to. And that would then would essentially force the arrow to only be at those particular angles. So if I go and add there 180 and 75 as well as 90, you can see those angles are now marked on the parameter itself. So if I had to go and test this, it would then only give those angles for me to snap to. So if you are wanting to limit this for whatever reason, you've got the ability to ensure that it is snapping at those angles. In this case, I probably don't want that. I want them to be able to move around freely. So for the parameter itself, I'm going to set it, rather than being list, to none. And then the last one I want to show you, this one is a bit of a larger one and got a lot more detail to it, and that's the block label. So I've created a block label over here with a fairly simple shape. All this is a rectangle with fillets on the corners just to round it off nice and neatly. But what we've got the ability to do is set this so that when we are adjusting this label, we can have multiple rows of attributes. So in this case, I've gone in and created 5 rows of attributes that we can come in and add different values to. We've got row 3 over here, and we've also got row 5 over here. And that will essentially allow us to, again, make as many rows and add as much detailing to this as we want to. If we didn't want all 5 of those rows, I can remove the text from inside here, and you won't even see that the text is there. I can come in and slowly bring that down, and we've got a nice neat 3-row label. Or we can go up to 4, 5. We could also go all the way down to 1. And it's just by using this stretch command or parameter inside of the block itself. Not only that, we've also got the ability to then change the coloring of the block as well based on the color of the block itself. So rather than just having a standard color for the block, we can then say, well, whatever layer or whatever color is associated to that block, the whole block changes, the border and the fill of the block. So the way we can go about that, again, I've just created a fairly simple block over here, just with the rectangle and a fillet. I can go and edit this. And I'm going to call this one custom label, or it's already been called custom label. So I'm going to edit custom label. And we just want to go in and add again some attributes in here. So the first row is going to be called row 1. Could be label row 1 or whatever you want to call it. And then I'll call this one row 1 as the prompt. So later on when it's prompting for information, we know where that's coming from. I'll leave the default as nothing. And then the size of the text, if I remember correctly, was 6. I'll just double check that one now. And then we can go in and set the justification once more to middle center and keep the standard style of text from there. hit OK on there now, and 6 seems a little bit large, so I'll just make that a bit smaller the next time around. But the offset on this is going to be 6, which is where I was getting that value from. That's 3, 6. There we go. And let me just change the size of that text down to 3. That looks a bit better from there. And then it's a case of going in and repeating that process a few more times. I'll only do this one more time just to show how that's done. Row 2, row 2, and then leave that blank with a text height of 3 and justification of middle center. Hit OK on there. I could theoretically have gone in and changed all of those values afterwards, so gone in and selected each of these, or both of those, or as many of them as I wanted to, and then change the height and justification all at once, so it's just a case of putting them straight in each time. But you can decide on the way that works best for you. And once you've got that in there, it's then a case of ensuring that the gap between these two rows of text stays the same as we're stretching the block itself, as well as the distance between row 1 and the top of the object. So to do that, we can come in and add some dimensional constraints between the objects themselves. So that's in the dimensional panel over here. We've also got a constraints tab available to us in the authoring palette, which will also have some dimensions in there, so we can add some vertical dimensions, line dimensions, and so on from there. I'm going to go and just grab the linear one from the list in the dimensional view window. I'm going to go and add a dimension from that point to the center of the text, and I'm going to set that value as 6, which it's currently at already. I'll then go and add one more in, and that's going to be between this bit of text here and that one over there, and this is going to be 9 units between those, just because of the half distance between the top row of text and the top of the object, and then we want double that distance between the two objects themselves. So there's an imaginary line right down the middle of those two. We could have those values linked if I wanted to, so I could say that this D2 needs to be equal to D1 times 1.5. So if that value ever changes, it's always going to be 1.5 times that, so 1.5 times that, and we can have those two linked together as well. So that's one of the benefits then to using dimensions inside, or at least dimensional constraints inside of AutoCAD, is we can then start to build up some equations inside of those dimensions themselves. Once we've got those two rows in, we can then go in and make sure that we're adding in the parameter to allow us to stretch the block itself. Now this one's a little bit more complex than the others because of the nature of us having a few different shapes around the item itself. This would be simpler if it were just a rectangle, but because of the arcs on the side, we need to add a few constraints just to make sure that it keeps the design integrity true. So in that case, I want to go and add a tangent constraint between the arc and the horizontal line. That'll ensure that those two items always remain tangent to each other. And then that'll be on either side of the component, and then I may as well just apply that to the sides as well, just to be sure. And so that fillet will always now be tangent to those two, or those 3 lines now. The other constraint I want to make sure of as well is that this line at the top of here always remains horizontal, just in case that would break anything. So I'm going to go and apply a horizontal constraint to the shape itself. This might not need it on your side, but from testing on my side, my one needed it, so worthwhile pointing that one out as well. Now that we've got those conditions in place, we can come in and start to build up the parameters and actions once more. So in this case, the parameter is going to be a linear parameter. In other words, the gap between two objects is going to drive the action itself. So I'm going to go and grab the linear parameter, and then once a start point for that, which is always our base point, which is generally the part of your component that's not going to move, which is going to be my base point over there. And then the second point is going to be the middle of that top line over there. I'm going to move this and place this off to the side over here. So we've got 2 grips at the moment. I'll want to adjust that. So this distance value, rather than having two grips available, one at the bottom where I first clicked and one at the top where I clicked second, I want to change the number of grips down to 1 because I'm only going to want to stretch in one direction. And what you might notice is now that the distance between those 2 points is essentially what's driving our value. So we've got a distance value here of 30, and that's essentially what's going to be driving the stretch value in a bit. So we've got our parameter configured. The next step is to go in and grab an action that's going to be related to this, and the action is going to be a stretch. If you're not familiar with stretches in AutoCAD, we essentially define a region of our shape that needs to stay true to its current configuration and sizing and all of that. And then the rest of the items, as this section moves up and down, the rest of the items will need to adjust to make sure that the relationship stay true, essentially. So the parameter I want to link this to is obviously that distance parameter. And then the parameter point that's associated to the action, we only have one grip available to us now, and that's that top one over there. So I want to associate this action to that node over there. And then it's going to ask us to specify the first corner of the stretch frame. So this is when I'm wanting to define the corner or the objects that are essentially associated and will remain as they are, and everything else needs to adjust around them. So I'm going and grabbing that region over there because I want the horizontal line and the two fillets to remain as they are, but then the rest of the object needs to adjust accordingly. So I'm going to go and grab the rest of the object, which it seems to have done now by highlighting in blue, and I should be able to hit enter now and confirm that. And then one last thing, just to make sure that my items aren't getting confused with each other, is I want to make sure that my dimensional constraints don't have any grips, because we won't be changing those going forward, at least not on screen. So we only want that grip up at the top over there to be displayed. Now we can go and test that block and see how this works and make adjustments from there. So we now can go and select the block from here and start to stretch that, and you can see it's adhering to those rules that we've set. So those fillets are remaining as they are, and the line is remaining horizontal as we're stretching that up and down, which is exactly what we're wanting as part of this process. The other thing I want to test to make sure of is that the attributes are moving with this. So I can go into row 1 and just test by typing in row 1 and into row 2. And it looks like those two are behaving exactly how I'd want them. So moving these up and down, you can see how row 1 and 2 are keeping to the exact gap that I've told them to, based on that dimensional constraint. So that's working out perfectly. All I need to do now is close this test block and go back into the block label editor. From here, if I wanted to, I could go in and add the remaining rows. I created 5, but there's no real limitation on the number of rows. If you wanted more than that, you could do so and have it carry on stretching from there. One thing I might want to do in this one is just set a harder limitation on the exact gap or the exact size of this label that I'm creating. And in a similar way to changing that north arrow earlier, we can actually go and change the parameter that drives that gap in between. So if I go and grab the distance parameter from here and change the distance type, I can either go for an incremental or a list of values. In this case, I want an increment. So I'm going to go and grab increment. And in increment, I know that there is a gap of 9 units between each row. So I want to set the increment as 9. If your increment is slightly different, then obviously you'd want different values. And you can see just by adding that value of 9 in, I've now got different points at which my parameter will stop at every 9 units, every 9 millimeters in this case. I can also set a limitation in the number of points that it stops at, or at least a limitation in the size of those that stretch value. So I've got a maximum and a minimum value for these increments. So I might set this one now. So I've got the gap of 9 units over there. From here, I know that the current distance is 30 between those, so I might want to have two on either side, 2 times larger, or 2 increments larger and 2 increments smaller. So the minimum value I'll set at 12 units, and then the other one I'll set at 48. So 9 on either side. Sorry, not 9 on either side, 18 on either side. And you can see now we've got those hard limits displaying on screen for us. So again, I'm going to go and test that block, make sure that it's behaving in the way I'm expecting it to. So grabbing onto that grip, I've now got 5 different points that I can stop this at. So just for a single row, I've got it there at 12. For 2 rows, I've got it at 21, 30, 39, and 48. Again, depending on how many rows you want to apply to that, you might have more or less rows, but that's essentially the process of then ensuring that this is all set and configured correctly. I can go and close that block down and make sure that it is working inside of the normal environment. But the last thing I want to do as part of this process is ensure that the fill is going to be colorful as well. So first of all, I'll go and grab in the Home tab, I'll go and grab a hatch. And the hatch, I want it to be a solid color. And I'm going to place that solid color straight inside of the fill area. Now you might notice that the text is creating a bit of an island in there. So the way we can get around that is by going into the options drop down and saying that the island detection needs to be set to ignore island detection. So it's creating islands around the text. If you wanted that to remain as is, then, and rather if it wasn't showing that, you could always just make sure that the island detection is set to either outer island detection or normal island detection, depending on the use. But in this case, I don't want the text to create a blank region. I want the text to be on top of the hatch itself. So I'm going to close the hatch creation, but before I do that, I'm going to set the color, rather than to being by a certain color in this list or by layer, is to actually set it to by block. So whatever color we associate to the block itself, that's the color that the hatch will essentially inherit from the block itself. I'm going to close the block creation. And the last thing I want to do very quickly as well is the border of the component, the border of the block. I want to apply that same colorization rule as well, if it isn't already there. So in this case, it's not. The color is set to by layer at the moment, and I want this to be set to by block. So anything inside of your block that you want to have enabled to change color based on the block itself, we need to go and grab that by block option from inside there. And then the last thing to do really from here is to go test this block one more time to make sure that it's adhering to everything that we've told it to. So we can go into the block editor tab, test the block. At the moment, it's obviously a black block, so any text inside of the block itself won't necessarily show up. We could change the color of the text if you know that the labels are going to be black. But in my case, I don't think I'm going to want my labels being black. I want them to stand out a bit from the rest of my drawings. So I'll go in and I can go and choose any color that I want to associate to it. And then for row 1, I can type in row 1, row 2, I can type in row 2. And we can see the text is there. The blue might be a little bit dark, but we can handle that. And if I go and drag that down to, let's try that one more time. Down to the 2 rows, we've got the 2 rows there. If we go up to 5 rows, it seems to have placed them on opposite sides, but if I just quickly tweak that, interesting. Okay, there must be something ever so slightly wrong with that parameter, but you can see it is still working. It's still keeping that gap exactly as we want it to. So for the most part, that's working. It might need some minor tweaking to the configuration of those parameters over there. But if you aren't wanting this to adjust, and you're just wanting a single static 3-row block or 3-row label, you can essentially repeat the same process, but ignore the whole stretch and list parameters essentially from inside of that. So that's essentially all we wanted to go over today. I hope it's been beneficial. If you have any questions or any issues when creating a block, something like this, and want to get in contact with us, please feel free to get in contact, and we would be able to assist in either the creation of other dynamic blocks or just helping and consulting on the creation of your own blocks within your libraries. So other than that, thank you very much for your time today, and hopefully we will see you again soon. Goodbye for now.